This week, Theresa Lanowitz from Level Blue is with us to discuss barriers on the road to cyber resilience. Then Rob Allen from ThreatLocker joins us to talk about stopping zero-day exploits. Finally, in the enterprise security news, funding and acquisition news slows down as we get into the I'm more focused on holiday shopping season. North Pole Security picked an appropriate time to raise some seed funding. AWS has incident response services now. Breaking news, it's still super easy to exfiltrate data out of an enterprise. The nearest neighbor attack, we'll talk about that. Agentic security is the next buzzword you're probably going to get tired of very quickly. Frustrations with separating work from personal in the Apple device ecosystem. We check in on the AI SOC and see how it's going. And attackers are having success with ancient vulnerabilities. All that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device, because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1password. Graylog elevates enterprise-level cybersecurity through its comprehensive SIEM, centralized log management, and API security solutions. Built on the Graylog platform, Graylog Security combines SIEM, security analytics, threat detection, and incident response capabilities. Unlike traditional SIEMs, which offer complex and costly setups, Graylog Security simplifies security and operational challenges with an optimal blend of licensing, people, and infrastructure costs. To see a demo, visit securityweekly.com/Graylog. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Repeal Day. This is episode 386, recorded on Thursday, December 5th, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of ASPM, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How you doing, Katie?
I'm well. How are you, Adrian?
I am good, and I just today learned that there was a National Repeal Day, and that is related to prohibition, which is a very interesting time in our history. It's the only amendment in the U.S. Constitution to have ever been repealed so far. And I learned that while the 18th Amendment made it illegal to manufacture, distribute, and sell alcohol, it wasn't illegal to consume it. So you could totally just make your own beer, wine, or liquor at home. You just couldn't buy it. So you didn't get in trouble for consuming it, only if somebody was trying to manufacture and distribute it and sell it.
It seems like a good skill to have.
Yeah. No, it's a fun hobby. I made the beer and wine for my wedding many years ago, and yeah, it's fun to do. Even if it doesn't come out great, it's still something that you made, and generally it's not hard to make a good batch of stuff. But yeah, just super interesting time. NASCAR traces its roots to prohibition, where they were souping up cars for bootlegging moonshine. And prohibition gave us speakeasies, which is still like a popular style of bar that people will create kind of like a whole look to it, like secret knocks and everything, secret passwords to enter. And just interesting history that I was reading into. And interesting now, non-alcoholic beer is trending very hard right now. In fact, I've been enjoying Athletic Brewing has IPAs that taste like real IPAs. Like I can't even tell the difference.
A lot of non-alcoholic drinks have become very popular, and I have a few friends who don't drink at all for various reasons. And for instance, one of my friends, she and her husband had a baby last year, but she still wanted to be able to go out and have the experience of drinking a fun drink, right? Because the rest of us are getting a fun cocktail. She wanted a fun drink. She didn't want to be relegated to just water. And it was great for her and these other friends to be able to order something really fun that's not just basic, or soda that's not great for you anyhow. And
it's uncommon now to find places that don't do mocktails and fun drinks that are not, don't have alcohol in them. So,
sometimes
it's
I
good to see
like the
that.
look of a non-alcoholic drink on a menu better than the alcoholic drinks. And there was one time I liked it and still wanted the
Yeah.
alcohol. And I asked them, hey, can you turn this into an alcoholic drink? And they did. It was great.
Yeah, it's good. Choices are always great.
Choices are
Yeah.
always good.
All right, moving on. This interview is sponsored by Level Blue. Today's topic is removing barriers from cyber resilience, and we're excited to once again have Theresa Lanowitz with us today. Theresa is the Chief Cybersecurity Evangelist at Level Blue. Welcome, Theresa.
Hi, Adrian. It's great to be here with you again. And I always learn so much from you on whatever national day we're celebrating. So I'm just thinking back to Prohibition, and you're saying it wasn't illegal to consume alcohol, it's just illegal to sell it.
Yeah.
So you could make it, somebody could come to your house,
Mhm.
and you're not selling it. You're just having a dinner party and people are consuming, right?
Yeah, totally. And it was something I didn't. I learned that today. And that's. I kind of enjoy these national days. Sometimes it's just something really silly, and sometimes it's something historic. And I learned some stuff. Like I learned that Montreal was very popular because even though prohibition was a big thing in Canada, not really in Quebec. Quebec did not really get into it, and we do have a Quebecois joining us for the news today. Guillaume will be coming in, so maybe we can ask him about that. But yeah, so people from the Eastern Seaboard would take the train up into Montreal to enjoy a drink during Prohibition.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think our image of Prohibition is just always so it's really formed by what we see on movies and TV
Yeah.
shows, that sort of thing. So that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So jumping in here, cyber resilience, I've really enjoyed our conversations here. And I do, in the show notes for today, I do point to the two previous ones that we did here. Let's see. I do have the labels here. I believe one was concerning budgets. Yeah, cybersecurity budgets, the journey from reactive to proactive. That was episode 383. And cybersecurity success is business success was the first one we did just a couple months ago, episode 380. So check out those as well. Those are in the show notes and kind of build up to what we're going to be talking about today, which I think we're going to kick off talking about the barriers to cyber resilience, which, I think there are a lot. I think we still have it feels like we have made progress in cybersecurity. It's certainly mainstream. It's a constant topic in the news and among executives. But it seems like some of the same barriers still remain. Is it just me?
I think you're absolutely right that some of those same barriers are still out there. In our research that we did this year, we find that cybersecurity teams are still underfunded, overlooked. They still live in a silo. So even though we have talked as an industry about breaking down silos for what seems like decades now, we still have this problem that there's just this fundamental disconnect between a whole project that might go online within inside of an organization and how cybersecurity is actually implemented, the cybersecurity issues that are out there, cybersecurity concerns, the risks, and so on.
In fact, I was reading some research today in preparation for something else that I'm doing. That was saying it was something like 40% didn't have response plans for a specific part of their infrastructure because they had never had ransomware yet. Like it hadn't happened to them. I'm like, really? Are we
they
really
didn't
gonna
know they had ransomware yet? Maybe is more accurate.
Right. Yeah, could be. But generally, when you have ransomware because that little thing called the ransom lands in your inbox, that extortion letter. But our business is really just like my house is surrounded by other houses on fire, and I'm still not going to go out and get a fire detector or take measures to make sure I don't set fire while cooking bacon.
It's fascinating because our research shows very similar to what you were just talking about with an incident response plan. Only 35% of the organizations that we surveyed say they have an incident response plan. And it's not just ransomware, for example, because people said they haven't had ransomware yet, and there's that
Right.
operative word yet. But it's also that incident response plan for that whole IT estate that you have to bring back online if something unfortunate or unforeseen happens. So, some type of cyber breach, ransomware is a perfectly good example. But also, there can be man made disasters that are occurring when you're inside of this IT estate, or there can be a natural disaster. You're hit by, I live in the Pacific Northwest. We just got a notification that we're under tsunami warning right now because of an earthquake off the northern coast of California. So there's those natural disasters. So if there is a tsunami and it comes in and it overtakes your business, what type of plan do you have to bring that entire IT estate back online? And that includes all of the cybersecurity functions as well.
What about the demographics? Can you talk a little bit? You said 35%. What are the demographics of this study? Is it small businesses, huge businesses, certain industries?
So we went off, and in March of 2024, we surveyed 1,050 cybersecurity professionals, C-level, C-level -1, C-level -2, across 7 different vertical industries: healthcare, retail, finance, manufacturing, transportation, energy and utilities, and U.S. SLED. And the company size was 1,000 employees or greater. And there were some instances, for example, in manufacturing and in U.S. SLED, where we had to put that threshold of number of employees down to about 500. And this was across 18 different countries. So it's a global survey. So we're getting this same information. And what surprised me about this data was that as we dug into the different vertical industries, the numbers were pretty much the same, 35% only having an incident response plan. US SLED surprisingly performed much, much better in terms of the appearance of maturity versus those other industries markets that we surveyed.
That's interesting. That's really interesting because you would think a larger organization, not 1,000 plus, but maybe 5,000 plus, would at least have a little more breathing room. And yet you're saying no. And you're saying SLED, which is more resource constrained on the whole in general than a lot of other industries with more profitability, is actually doing better than some
But maybe
private.
more regulated?
Well, that's true too, but so is
I think you're right.
manufacturing.
Yeah, it brings, so is financial services, they're all healthcare, they're all regulated in their own way. But I think the big difference with SLED is that they are used to working with a fairly sophisticated supply chain in terms of suppliers to what they're doing for their technology. And so I think that they're a little bit ahead of the game in terms of that because of the fact that they're working with these other trusted advisors that they bring in for their innovation.
So, I kind of want to continue talking down the regulation route because, talking about how some of these, same beliefs, it hasn't happened to us. At some point, it does bring me back to regulation. Like, okay, you're not going to do it on your own. Somebody's got to make you do it, right? So I wonder, Theresa, how you feel about regulation. I've been kind of eyeing DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, over in the EU, which is doing this for, again, I think it's certain verticals. I think it tends to be focused on finance verticals that have to do this. And the R in DORA, stands for resilience. So I'm wondering if that's what we're going to need to do to remove some of these barriers.
And that may be it. DORA certainly played a big role this year in what we saw in terms of regulation just around the globe. And I think what we also saw with that is it shed some light on the fact that maybe organizations weren't as resilient from a cybersecurity perspective as they thought they were, and they didn't have the right controls and mechanisms in place, such as a formalized incident response plan. So I think that that really shed some light on some of the problems. And I think if you look at over the past couple of years, some of the regulation that we've seen come in, the requirement now of a software bill of materials or an SBOM, That's a big one. The requirement to say, you have to have a formalized incident response plan. Those are big. The DORA regulations, those types of regulations coming out, it all comes back to we have to have good, and I come from an application development background. We have to have
Mhm.
good software engineering practices in anything we're doing. And that comes, we hear so much about secure by design, be
Mhm.
secure by design in whatever it is you're building, whether it's a software system, a hardware system, some type of architectural environment that you might be building. So this whole idea of secure by design plays into that as well.
Yeah, and I love the I think it's noble intent behind CISA's Secure by Design. A bunch of people have signed it, but my concern is, having worked in many startups, a lot of this software is barely making it out the door. So to attach anything additional to it, any kind of security requirements, like the level of effort it takes to not just put out a product, but to put out a secure product, might I don't know how much more effort, if it's double or triple the effort, maybe it's just 10% more effort, but with projects that barely get out the door before their competitors, again, if it's something voluntary, like I have a hard time seeing this gaining much ground.
I I would have to disagree with you on that. I think uh, from what I know from coming from a software development background is we have never as an industry done a very good job with our software requirements. And
Mhm.
so we've gotten away from good basic fundamental software engineering. And, you say that organizations who they're barely getting their software out the door. Well, how much time did they really spend up front on requirements? And if you take a look at what that cost of rework does to you, if you're
Yeah.
not looking at requirements from the beginning and saying, here's what I'm going to build. And oh, by the way, security is part of that because now we have the new portmanteau of DevSecOps, where it was just DevOps, but now we're bringing security further to the left of that equation. And we're saying we want to make sure that we're building secure from the beginning, secure by design. So I'm optimistic with this that we're going to see a return to some good software engineering practices. We're going to take a look at, we always talk about in software engineering, the ilities. So the non-functional requirements. So security is one of them, performance is one of them. And I'm optimistic that we're starting to take a look at things such as security, performance, some of the other ilities that are out there.
Yeah, I do have to agree with you on that. That I think a lot of it is a quality issue. In the quality of the process, the making sure you have clear requirements, that those um, are clearly communicated to engineers. And I think a lot of the security enhancements that we've seen in the past couple of years with Agile, with cloud, with DevOps, haven't been intentionally for security. They've been for performance, for reliability, just for uh, just meeting the speed requirements and the performance requirements of these startups. And then we get some security benefits from that, like the ability to patch and replace code without taking down the entire application. Containers have made things a lot more flexible and made businesses a lot more agile, but they've also made them more secure, I feel like.
And I think when you talk about performance, you're really talking about the performance, the speed of getting something to market. So getting something from being a liability to being an asset, getting it into production. And when I'm talking about performance, I just wanted to be clear what my mention of performance is it's really the performance engineering of how a system is going to perform from the speed of use. But I
Mhm.
agree with you. I think that a lot of these things that we've seen, they've sped up the ability to deploy, but in many cases, they've circumvented some of the things that we actually have to have for a good software engineering lifecycle. And
Yeah.
if you look at security, cross-site scripting SQL injection, it's been on the OWASP top 10 for 20 plus years. And cross-site scripting, SQL injection, it's still on the OWASP top 10. So if we were truly interested previously of saying, let's make security more about what the developer is going to be able to deal with, what you might get in some sort of peer review, code peer review, that sort of thing. We've gone way beyond that because cross-site scripting and SQL injection are still around, unfortunately.
And we do have things like Rust and prepared statements, things that will take entire classes of vulnerabilities out. Like those are an option, but oftentimes, again, like if you're having trouble hiring talent, you're probably going to build it in whatever the team lead of the development team is most comfortable with, or whatever the CTO has used in the past. So, maybe it's all going to be PHP. I don't know.
And that's an excellent point, right? I mean, if people have done it previously, they're going to say, well, this is what I did before. Was it the best choice? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And I think one of the things that we're starting to see now is that we have this idea that everybody in the organization is responsible for security in some way, and that the line of business is going to have to say, yes, this is my CIO is responsible for security in this way, my CTO is responsible for security in this way. So we start to see this convergence, if you will, of security coming into the business and being part and parcel of the business. But what that also means is that in many cases, organizations are going to say, I've never done this before. And I know there are people out there doing it. Maybe it's my competitor, maybe it's somebody in an adjacent market. But there's going to be now this need to bring in these trusted advisors from the beginning, all the way from the requirements phase, which, and I hate to use the word phase because that just sounds as though it's very waterfallish. But from the requirements perspective, when you're saying, here's what we want to do, here's what we think the business outcome can be, and more people involved in it.
Katie, you're in the application security world. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just a tricky problem, right? Because Theresa, you were talking about performance in terms of use and usability from the end user. And I think there is a recognition that any type of performance issues that could potentially be caused by a bug, a flaw, or whatever are unacceptable, right? We want our software to go fast. We want it to be always up. We want it to be easy to use. We were actually talking about it before we started recording, easy to use apps. And so I think those things are getting into the mindset of the developers a little bit more, but yet we do have a problem. And obviously I'm biased because this is what I live and breathe all but for 2 hours of this show, is that a lot of vulnerabilities, nobody knows how to deal with them. And they're willing to take the risk because they don't know how to say, I can't deal with all of this. Somebody has to prioritize. And every vendor in my space and adjacent space is saying, we know prioritization. We have this. And sometimes it's right. Sometimes it's wrong. There is no one prioritization mechanism. There have to be individual tailored ones. And I think that's where development teams start to get a little titchy, rightfully so. And then AppSec teams get upset, but yet we still are talking at the end of the day about resilience because, we've seen myriad breaches caused by the unavailability or just general compromise. And you don't think of it, you're like, oh, I'm using, Adrian, you were talking about using your phone for banking, before we started the recording. And if all of your customers can't use their app, that's a massive, massive disruption to the business. If you can't get that up and running, wow, that's a hit. I'm not on the, you have a breach, your company's going out of business, but it is still a hit in a lot of ways. And I do see the friction and the struggle still between developers who are charged with getting things out of the way and having the ability to bypass controls, but yet that risk is ratcheting up. And every time that risk ratchets up, it's not just about like, oh, yeah, we lose a customer's data. That's bad enough. But what if it takes down a whole section of your business and they can't run? I would bet, going to do a fun bet here. Hold on, because we're coming up to the holiday season. I am going to bet that we're going to see at least one company with some web app issue, major company with some web app issue this season that prevents people from buying their toy, gadget, widget, whatever. Mm-hmm. That should be, yeah. I mean, if anything gets anybody's attention, that should be it. What if you run some retailer and the hottest toy on the market, you can't sell that for 2 hours and your competitor can? We're talking about millions.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, PSN Network went down during Christmas. I think it was Lizard Squad or something like that. I forget if it was a denial of service attack, but everybody was opening their new PlayStation games and nobody could get online and play them.
Which is frustrating, but what if it's pre-Christmas and then you're losing millions of dollars in revenue?
For sure. Yeah.
And, Katie, you bring up such a great point because we are in the midst of the holiday shopping season. And, we saw some high profile attacks last week before. And I think one of the things that you're talking about is largely, I have a website, I'm selling the hottest Christmas toy of the year. My website goes down. Why did my website go down? Did my website go down because of a denial of service attack? Did my website go down because I didn't build the right performance into it? Did my website go down because I'm using a public cloud provider and it's not necessarily the traffic coming to me, but it's maybe noisy neighbors on that cloud instantiation? So there are a lot of problems that organizations have to look at. And one of the things we discovered is that across the board, people want to innovate. And they also know that across the board, innovation brings risk. And that's why I'm a big fan of going back to those basic software engineering principles of saying, yes, innovation is awesome, innovation is great, but we have to bring in these non-functional teams, performance, to your point about a website going down, security to make sure that we're covering the risk that we're bringing in with innovation. So there are some basic fundamental software engineering practices that have to go into play again, I think.
Yeah, and kind of moving this to, I think a lot of this requires aligning with the business and understanding their concerns as well, understanding what can take down the business. To Katie's point about not being able to sell stuff, just thinking about some of the third-party breaches we've seen, Kaseya, Change Healthcare, Colonial Pipeline, the car dealership one, I forget the name of that company where people couldn't buy cars. It was all billing systems. In each of these cases, either the billing systems were directly targeted, like in the Colonial Pipeline case, or indirectly affected, like in the Kaseya case. There was a grocery store chain in Sweden that didn't know that their payment provider used Kaseya. And because Kaseya impacted that payment provider, they couldn't use their POS system. So they just had to close.
Right. And sometimes those are catastrophic, and sometimes the way a company deals with a breach allows them to continue on, and they have better capabilities than they ever did before. I mean, just last week over the holiday, I was doing some online shopping and I went to a very popular .com site, and they have been the recipients of several breaches over the past decade, 15 years or so. And they had a really great way of allowing you to create an account. You could either create the account with a password or you could create it with a passkey. And in very simple English, in a little pop-up menu right next to where you were creating your account, they told you the difference between using a password and using a passkey, and how a passkey was just more secure for you. So I think that was a really great way of getting better business outcomes, people would feel more secure. They know they're not putting themselves at risk as much. But this idea of saying use a pass key rather than using a password was just so brilliant the way they did it. I thought it was just exceptional the way they did it.
And you got to sell it right, though. And that's what it sounds like. They did a really good job of selling the kind of pros and cons of each option there, and not having to remember passwords anymore. Who wouldn't want that? That's a better outcome for everybody, right?
And they were very clear that, a password in using our system is not going to be as secure for you or as easy for you as using a pass key. And it was just brilliant the way they did it. So I think in many cases, what we saw there was the marketing message aligned with the technology, aligned with the user experience. So it was just a good, positive experience all the way through, from the purchasing of the product to the checkout to the payment to setting up the account. It was great, really well done.
And I think countless studies have shown that individual people are terrible at judging and determining like their own risk profile, right? Choosing what's best for themselves. I think you had a good TSA anecdote or metaphor here as well.
Right. If anybody has flown recently and you go through TSA PreCheck or through Clear, they say, well, we're just going to take this temporary photo of you so we can match it against your identity that you've given us. And it's another layer of security, but it's frictionless. And I fly in and out of Seattle International Airport. And in Seattle, a lot of people were pushing back on this idea of saying they're taking my picture, but they're telling me it's temporary. But yet these same people, they'll go onto social media sites, they'll post their birthday, they'll post photos of their kids, they'll post where they went on vacation. Women will identify themselves through their unmarried name. And that's one of the biggest security questions that you get asked is, what is your mother's unmarried name? And it's pretty easy for a cyber adversary to piece together those little bits of clues that people have left out there on social media, yet they were drawing a line at a temporary photo taken to be able to do facial identification against your identity that you gave, your ID that you gave them. So I thought that was really interesting in how people will push back. And again, I think that TSA message, it needed to be marketed better to the passengers to say, something like, look, this is just more secure for you. It's more points of us verifying who you are, verifying your ID matches who you really say you are. So I think there's a lot of marketing that needs to go around this as well, which goes back to that point that I was making, that security now needs to be tied to the business. And we're going to see the business saying, okay, what are we going to do for security at each of these steps, whether it's product delivery, putting the product out to market, informing the consumer, and so on.
I think one thing you hit on, and I know we're going to go over time, you can make me shut up, but Theresa, you hit on something really important. And since I do work in product marketing, this is something I think about with TSA, because I too flew last week, and every time I go and then they say temporary picture, I'm like, yeah, right, what? But I mean, I'm walking around the airport anyway. They're already taking my picture or video, if you're in a public place. So, I roll my eyes at the temporary, but I think it's like you said, the messaging of it. And I think where people are pushing back on it, and this is just my hypothesis that I haven't tested, is that it feels like an authoritarian. You have to take your picture. And if you don't take your picture, you're going to have to wait in this longer line. And if you wait in this longer line, you risk your spot. And if you risk your spot, you could risk getting to your flight on time. Versus like what you said about that website, which has a very soft and very encouraging tone, versus if you don't do this, you're causing trouble for yourself, versus you can do this and it will help you in the future. You can do this. It will make your life easier. And oh, by the way, you'll also be more secure. So it's not just about this one time, it's in the future too. And it's that kind of familiarity. And I always go back to the dawn of mobile phones, right? And when executives started bringing their phones to business and security was going, no. And the executives were saying, yeah. right? We're doing it anyway. And then social media and all these things that were brought in by consumerism, because consumerism plays on that innate human reaction to wanting to be included, wanting to feel in control. And when you're being told how to control your identity versus invited in to share your identity, I think we have to do better with the marketing message to make people feel like they're being included versus forced to do security. Because when people feel forced, we're all going to push back a little. It doesn't matter how security minded we are. There's something little in the back of your brain going.
Totally agree with you. And I think one of the other things that we've gotten over this past decade or so is that we always would talk about security needing to be frictionless. The tooling is so good. Development tooling is so good now. Developers are doing a much better job now with including security. And so security can be frictionless, but we look at those 2 points, the .com site that I was talking about versus what they're doing for facial recognition at airports. And it's a completely different message. The seamlessness, the frictionless of it is there because it's easy to do those photos at the airport. It takes no time at all. It takes far less time to do that than it does to pull out your driver's license or your passport and have somebody look at it. It's just so much more seamless, but yet people push back on it because of, like you said, more of this authoritarian way of doing things versus being invited into it. So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, on principle. Yeah, another great conversation, Theresa. I love chatting with you about this stuff. I love the examples you bring. Theresa, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thanks so much, Adrian. It was great to be here.
All right, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/levelblue to learn more. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to discuss stopping zero-day threats without AI or superhuman speed with Rob Allen from ThreatLocker.